Não, ela tem o aparelhinho de tradução simultânea. Pode falar em português. Não, mas tem o público é brasileiro. Nós temos tradução simultânea. Só queria informar para vocês que nós teremos agora no
Now, for panel 3, for those who wish, there will be simultaneous translation, so please, we'll begin in 30 seconds, the third panel. Daniel is already sitting here. He's already taken his seat, oh good. So I'd like to invite because if we don't begin, people outside stay outside. It's not easy to be strict with a break. But I'll ask Promo Eventos team to help me to go back and telling people that we are beginning, we are resuming our third panel. If you don't walk in, you will begin, you will miss the beginning.
So panel number 3 will be starting now, perspectives on investment funds, identifying and investing in less favored communities. This panel will be different from the previous ones. There will be no PowerPoint presentations. Our guest here from the US is partner from Pelham S2K Managers, LLC. Her name is Vanita Fields. We have a Brazilian guest, Mr. Daniel Izzo, who is co-founder and CEO from Vox Capital. And this debate will be mediated by Mr. Humberto Matsuda, who is partner from Performa and a counselor from ABV Cafe, and also counselor from Anjos do Brasil Institute. So without further ado, as people are coming into the room, I will give the floor to Mr. Humberto Matsuda, who will be mediating this talk. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy it. Good morning, everyone. Well, first and foremost, I would like to thank you for the opportunity for being here. It is such an honor to be in a panel like this with such great guests, and I hope you, along with I, can learn a lot about investments. Before we start, I want to open the floor for you. I want this panel to be as most interactive as possible. So as we talk, you may be able to get the mic, ask your questions, so that everyone may enjoy this conversation. So I'd like to give the floor to the two panelists. First, Ms. Vanita, and then Danielle, so that you may tell us briefly a bit about your history and about the expectation you have on investments. Vanita has quite a different background from the background I have and Danielle's background. And Danielle knows a lot about impact investments. So we can set the stage here and see what is the common ground for our conversation. So, Vanita, the floor is yours. Boa tarde, meu
nome and Inova Capital. And privately held businesses. About 20 years as a banker, starting out making commercial loans to small and medium-sized businesses and working for various large financial institutions such as Citibank and Bank of America. After being in banking for about almost 19 years, I decided that I wanted to do something a little bit more entrepreneurial, and I was asked to join a firm that was also woman-owned and minority-owned to join their firm in the private equity space. So for the last almost 20 years, I've been a private equity investor, making investments in about 38 businesses across 3 limited partnerships in the private equity space. And I've invested in sectors such as manufacturing, healthcare, distribution, as well as business services. So that's a little bit about my background.
Bom dia, eu sou Daniel, sou fundador da Vox Capital. Vox Capital é um fundo que investe em negócios com impacto social. Então é o que o Humberto chamou de investimento de impacto. Quer dizer que a gente busca negócios que juntem impacto social positivo com retorno financeiro. O que a gente tem feito de investimento
that put together investments that are profitable with socially impactable investments. We're focusing on companies on education, healthcare, and access to financial institutes that use technology to provide solutions for real problems for low-income population in Brazil. We are now starting to work with our second investment fund. We have invested in over 20 companies. And our target is to deliver high-quality products. We want to deliver products that solve problems that go about with low-income populations. That does not mean we want to build products for poor people. No, we want to build solutions that provide quality that could be used by all classes. So we have companies, for example, that are serving hospitals in the state of Rio Grande do Norte, in the northeastern part of the country, as well as high-quality hospitals in São Paulo. So it is a pleasure to be here. Well, my first question for the panelists is the following. Every manager of third-party resources needs to have a thesis and need to know where they're going to apply that money. Now, from your experience, how do you think an investment on companies may foster or may benefit specific parts of the population or specific minorities? How do you think investments may foster social inclusion or even a change in the quality of life of this population? How do you work with this? How do you go about that? Throughout your careers, you've focused on racial minorities and less favored parts of the population. How do you think they could be helped through the investments? Eu acho que
And wealth creation starts at the top of the entrepreneur, and hopefully, if the entrepreneur is good and is competent, that wealth filters down to the community that he or she serves, specifically to the employees who are then able to provide for their families. They circulate those dollars in their communities, and hopefully they educate their children so that they too can benefit in a long-term way. So that is the essence of what an investment should do, is create wealth, hopefully that gets distributed throughout the people that it affects.
Quando a gente olha para investimento de impacto,
when we look at impact investments, we often think that the intention of this impact needs to be at the design level. What often goes about is that sometimes we invest looking for profits and eventually have a positive impact in society. But in the design stage, that was not thought of. There was no intention of solving a real problem. Now, when it comes to impact investments, we bring this change to the core. So which are the problems we have in the healthcare institutions, in schools, or even in other areas that you may be interested of? So what are we looking for in your investments? So throughout time, I mean, of course, your business needs to grow, It needs to bring results, otherwise it will vanish. But you have to go and measure if you are effectively delivering the initial idea that you had as you invest. So the core problem is how much are you solving the problem that you identified first place. So investment here becomes something that has a more of a deep insight than just saying, for instance, healthcare. What is healthcare for you? You have, well, you can identify 4 troubles or 4 problems that need to be solved to low-income population. So when it comes to impact investment, we have a more of a detailed design that targets those businesses that want to solve a real problem first place. Great. Well, in your talks, I understood that there is a social role to be played by private investments. So private investments may determine the future of a company, right? That is underlying in your talks. So my question is, in your activities, we have to take into account the capacity of the investor to influence the company. So do you think is there an educative role? I mean, the role of the investor is to help company to become more sustainable, more inclusive, to have a better social role? Or do you think this is something that has to be born inside companies? The question is, do you think you have to build this initiative together, or is that a differentiator? Olha, eu não conheço nenhum investidor passivo. Não existe isso. Se a gente estiver investindo em alguma empresa, você não está somente dando um capital para eles, mas também um valor agregado no que se refere a recursos, quer seja a parte educativa, quer seja a apresentação deles para diferentes players do mercado. Se você quiser receber o seu investimento de volta com um retorno substancial, você tem que se envolver com a empresa. Talvez não na atividade do cotidiano, mas como membro do conselho administrativo. Talvez para que possa apresentar essa empresa
in all of your investments from cradle to grave. I only mean that in a very, I don't mean it literally. So, but from beginning to end.
Não foi exatamente o que você perguntou, mas eu vou trazer
I know you didn't quite ask what I'm going to talk about, but it's something you have to take into account. It's not only about managing a company. When we invest, we oftentimes don't realize it. But when we reflect upon that, we see that we are actually influencing the future of a company. When we invest, we often make a decision considering the risk and the ROI. But actually, when you invest on a company, what we are doing is we're working for this company to be out there, to exist in the market. So the question is actually, I mean, I know this is not the answer to your question, but are we investing on those things that we want to see in the future? I think what we lack here is a focus.
Influencia a gestão, mas do jeito que a gente vê, Humberto, ou o empreendedor, para a gente, ou o empreendedor tem a intenção de, ou valoriza aquela solução que ele está desenvolvendo, ou a gente pura oportunidade financeira.
Okay, we're back. It's not about convincing entrepreneurs that your investment will have a positive impact. It's all about having a real connection with the company or a previous connection with the company and with the issue they are trying to solve. It's all about investing on something that touches the investor, because throughout time, in the first stage of our investment, we actually didn't care if this would have an impact or not, as long as the solution seemed to have an impact. Now, the thing about impact is that it influences all the decisions on an everyday life. When we receive a presentation, all we know is that it will change. I mean, businesses change, right? And if entrepreneurs do not have that dear to their hearts, change may happen anywhere or to any side. So if an entrepreneur, even if he doesn't consider himself to be a social entrepreneur, quote unquote, he has to focus on purpose and values that are important to them. Bom, eu vou mudar para o inglês. Can you hear me, ma'am? A tradução já voltou.
Bom,
Can you hear me, ma'am? Can you hear me well? Okay, great. So if we understand that investors may change the companies, I mean, they are not passive, as Ms. Vanita said, how can entrepreneurs prepare themselves to build this connection with investors? I mean, if we assume that investors may influence the management of the company, well, that may not always be a positive thing, right? So how can entrepreneurs position themselves facing that? How can they avoid a bad investor to take part of the company? Or even when there is a good investor, he may give suggestions that maybe are considered to be bad ideas by the entrepreneur. So how do you see this type of dynamic? How do you go about this preparation on the entrepreneur's side?
I know that many entrepreneurs are always desperate for capital. And so one has to be very careful when choosing your partner. It's not just about the money, but it's about the long-term view that the investor has and their track record. So I advise entrepreneurs to look for capital early. Look for capital before you need it. Start developing relationships with capital providers. I've never met a private equity investor that doesn't like to talk about himself. So you should avail yourself, introduce yourself, call them up and say, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm interested in growth and want to get your advice as to how I can go about that. You're not asking for money, you're asking for advice. Have several of these conversations with many investors. Find out who suits your temperament. First of all, if they take the meeting, that's great. They should take the meeting. It's their job to take the meeting, but often we know that that's not the case. But if they do take the meeting, 30 minutes, be mindful of their time, have a list of questions that are very pointed and to the point, and just get advice. And over time, you'll get to know that many investors are not created equally. Each has their own proclivity. They invest in certain sectors. They are not interested in other sectors. They have a certain size parameter that they want to invest in. And also find out who they invested in and go talk to those people, because they will give you the best clue as to how they've been treated as a portfolio company. So that is what I would do. Do your homework, go early, go often, and meet as many people as you can.
Concordo.
I fully agree with what she said. Now, just to add to that, I want to say that just like an investor assesses entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs need to assess investors. And oftentimes, these two sides of the equation get kind of confused. It seems that the person who has the money is the boss. Now, if you think about it, if you think about how things are organized, money is sort of a commodity here. The person who has a good idea and can put this idea into place is much more important. Now, the rare product is in the hands of the entrepreneur. So he and she needs to know how to value. You know, it's sort of a pearl that he has in his hands, this great idea. And then he has to talk to investors on the same level. And of course, to do that, of course, you need to have support, right? You need to be able to put that into place to execute the project. But you have to understand that you are at a common ground, that you are at the same level as the investor. Something else I want to add is that aside from the technical part of it all, there is a human side to this. The type of investments that we make when it's a very young company, well, we are to stay with the company for about 5 to 7 years. So you have to consider if you really want to have this relationship with that person, which is actually longer than many marriages, right? So you have to try and assess if you really want to work with that person for such a long time. That is also something you have to ask yourselves. Great. So if we consider the ability of the entrepreneur to have a good negotiation with investors, from my experience, I can tell that entrepreneurs usually have this vision on money. They think money is more important. They think investors are their boss, and they often put themselves on a lower level in the conversation. Now, when it comes to social models, in a perfect world, this would go about in other types of human relationships, right? So my question for you both is, if in the real world there is a fight for gender equality, there is a fight for ethnical equality, there is also a discussion on how to reduce social inequality. How do you think this may influence the way people look for investments? There is a work that has to be carried out so as to empower this type of relationship, or not? Do you think the intention is enough? You just go and try to invest on certain profiles. In other words, do you think investors are responsible to promote this type of reduction of inequality? How do you see this type of dynamics? Because this is a topic that is getting more and more important and something that truly affects the end outcome of the company, meaning that companies that have a higher level of diversity tend to have a better ROI. Do you think this is already embedded in the investors' daily work? Foi uma pergunta gigantesca.
I just don't.
Começar.
To their investors. Now that's not at any cost, but that is the ultimate goal. And in order for there to be true equality, the entrepreneur has to change, but the investor has to change also. And the way the investor class has to change. So what I mean by that is that you can't expect an institution to change if it's hiring the same individuals to make the same decisions that they are programmed to make. The people who welcome entrepreneurs into their doors have to also be of diverse backgrounds. They have to be women. They have to be minorities. You have to change the makeup of the investor class instead of always focusing on the entrepreneur changing. The investor class is to change. And the only way that I believe that will happen is if there are more people who look like me, who are in these institutions, who are trained financially, but who also don't have the scales of bias that majority members have. And I'm only speaking from the U.S. perspective. So, and you're right, Bruce. So I don't know if that helps to answer the question, but that's my answer for now. I'll think of something else.
Thank you.
Let me try and bring you a different perspective. Well, in the types of investments that we make, we look at more than 100 business proposals for every proposal that is approved. That is just the model we work with. We can only invest in scalable projects, and that may bring an ROI to us. Because out of 10 companies that we invest, we know that half of them will go wrong. They will fail, right? So we analyze 100 projects, and then we invest on one, and then out of 10 projects we invest on, 5 of them will be fine in the end of the day. So any investment decision needs to ensure that in the very base of the process, in the beginning of the product, we need a great deal of proposals with the same perspective for me to invest. So let's say I need to invest, I need to assess 1,000 companies to invest on 10. And this poses great challenges for us because when you go to the investors and you knock on their door, you need to focus on themes, because if investors want to do so, it is his or her responsibility to develop this ecosystem as a whole. It's no use just sit back in his table and wait for entrepreneurs to appear. They have to go and build this ecosystem, right? Back in 2009, we started talking about impact investments, and there was just one accelerator in Brazil. And we said, well, if we want to do that, we will have to build this ecosystem in the country. We also work with those guys from Abanca, who is an institute that came to us and asked, well, why don't you invest in entrepreneurs who are disadvantaged? And I said, well, we need to build a pipeline. You need to help us develop an accelerator for these businesses. So this guy that came to talk to me built this first forum in Jardim Angela, which is a poor neighborhood in São Paulo. So this type of initiative goes back to the roots of the environment and allows us to have a greater volume of entrepreneurs so that we may more and more have more and more themes to solve specific problems in the real world. Well, Daniel talked about investment funds focused on topics and themes, and I'd like to go a little deeper into that. Just like Venita said, investors need to play their role, just like entrepreneurs need to play their roles. So what do you think is the role of investors that invest on the funds that are created? As investors invest on private equity or venture capitals, do you think these investors have a role to play in this ecosystem, in the community where he is, so as to promote new investments and promote inclusion? Or do you think this is a role from managers? They have to go upwards. How do you see this relation from the person who has the money after it is allocated to the entrepreneurs? Eu posso emendar na sua resposta? Não, não. Igualdade de gênero. Well, if we want to build a fund on a certain theme or on a certain purpose that goes beyond profitability, you have to look for investors that are looking for the same thing. We all have to be aligned. And this is pretty much what we do. Now, by doing so, I reduce the potential of investment from 100% to, less than 1%. Because I'm looking for people with purposes, right? So this is something that goes about on a daily basis. It is harder to find these types of investments, but if we think long term, if I receive this money from investors that are not aligned, it will not be sustainable. So just like I said before, you have to receive money from those investors that are aligned with you. And if you are an investor and you're looking for different partners, same thing has to go about. So let's say if you want to focus on a certain theme or maybe on impact investments, you need to look for investors who want to see social investment and things that go beyond business and profitability. So I think the same thing applies.
In the
Obrigado.
United States, there have been several investors, institutional investors, who've made a move to get general partners or private equity investors who are interested in emerging markets. Many of these investors, as an example, are large institutions like CalPERS, CalSTRS, New York Common, Illinois teachers. These large pension funds have made a commitment to try to find managers who are willing to invest in emerging, we call them emerging markets in the States. And the reason for that is that their constituents, the policemen, the firemen, the teachers, are diverse people. They're African Americans, they're Hispanics, they're women, and they wanted to see their investment dollars go with people that reflect them. And so this movement has been in existence for about 15 to 20 years. And so in those instances, those institutional investors are basically putting their fingerprint, their thumbprint on how investments are made. They're not settling for lower returns. They're demanding the same high returns, but they're saying we want to diversify our portfolio of managers, because portfolio theory tells us that you need diversity in your portfolio to mitigate risk. And so if you're willing, no one owns 100% of Coca-Cola stock. No one does that. You own 20 to 40 different stocks in your portfolio. So why not have diverse managers as well to mitigate the risk and to hopefully stabilize the overall return of your portfolio?
Posso dar uma visão do Brasil para comparar com os Estados Unidos? Assim, ela falou de alguns exemplos de fundos de pensão, né, que a gente tem aqui também no Brasil. Mas um dos efeitos da taxa de juros alta do Brasil é que os gestores de fundo de pensão eles não precisam investir em algo que é mais arriscado. Então, boa parte do dinheiro do fundo de pensão hoje está em ativos de zero risco, título de governo, CDB, etc., que não ajuda na inovação, mas garante o retorno que eles têm. Ou garantia, né? Porque as coisas estão mudando, mas garantia o retorno que eles tinham que dar.
Because things are changing, right, in Brazil. So when we see that the interest rates are dropping, this may help us increase investment on innovation, because then folks will have to diversify their portfolio, as she said, to try and look for return of investment for the pension funds that they have. Well, considering all this scenario, I'm assuming here that we could do more. We could go further. In the US or even in Brazil, we still have a long way to go for us to meet the goal that we have. Well, having said that, do you think this is a problem from lawmakers, from legislation, or do you think there is a different barrier, maybe a cultural barrier or prejudice from people that limits us or prevents us from diversifying?
That there's just a lack of information that's out there that's preventing this from happening. So I thought I would share with you, if you don't mind, a few statistics that I have from a study that was done in 2012. So this study surveyed about 25 to 30 diverse managers in the country. The name, and I'll be specific because I believe in being specific. The name of the study is Recognizing the Results. And this study was done in 2012. and it was compiled by KPMG. Basically, it said it studied diverse managers from 1998 to 2011. And basically, based upon this study, it found that the minority managers outpaced the performance of the larger market by 2 times, and that's the larger private equity market and the buyout market. So I'm going to give you some data. So for the upper quartile net IRR, the diverse managers returned 20.9% IRR. That was the upper quartile. The upper quartile for PE as a whole was 11.8%, and buyouts 14.7%. The medium quartile net IRR was 15%. Private equity, medium quartile, and this is Thomson Reuters Capital, so this is a very reputable database. Medium net IRR for PE was 3.7%. Buyout 7.1%. So basically what this says is that diverse managers, when given the opportunity, can provide returns that exceed the general PE industry. And I believe if this information were out there, that this would hopefully help to persuade people that they're not taking that much risk if they're providing the money to the right managers.
I also think it's not about law or, you know, coming up with more legislation or anything like that. Specifically in Brazil, when it comes to legislation, I mean, I get goosebumps, you know, because we don't know how to define that. We don't know how to validate law and put it into place. I'm a kind of you know, skeptical when it comes to institutions in Brazil, for several reasons. I mean, but first, it's all about outcomes, and I think surveys like this one help us, you know, when we look at allocating funds and investment. If we had data on this in Brazil, this could be very helpful for us. But I think it all goes through this change in culture. We need to, you know, diminish prejudice. And I was kind of curious because what do they mean by diverse managers? Is this a diverse manager when it comes to gender, race, or everything? Mulheres e minorias, é isso? So in Brazil, I think we can come up with this type of survey because we do have a database to compare data. But if we want to change anything, first we have to show that it is possible. We have to prove our point by showing that results are feasible. This works much better than just a new law or new legislation that may create confusion in Brazil. Okay, let me give you my final remarks. I want to tell you that this is an interactive panel, so if you guys in the audience have any kind of questions, if you want to interact with us, you may feel free to do so. Microphones are in the audience, so just raise your hand. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rosanildo Ferreira, and I'm a journalist from Papo Reto newspaper. It is clear to me that it is quite difficult to understand this theme and to adapt it to the Brazilian context. I'm sorry, but I have to be honest here. We keep saying that laws get in our way, and I do agree with you, but there are many laws that prevent us from doing things. And we usually use the fact that we don't have law and do the correct things. Now, my question is, when are we really going to understand that, no, we can separate And we can't have a developed society if we don't consider 54% of society. That was all. Thank you. I'm not here to answer your comment, but I don't think that we can solve this problem just by investing on companies. I think it's more of a structural problem. You know, we have to work on the structure as a society. When you say that, what are investors doing about this? It means that you narrowed the perspectives, you know. I mean, your comment has to do with education. It has to do with several other things that go about in society even before people have the chance of becoming an entrepreneur and receiving an investment. I don't know if this makes sense for you, but the scenario that you're bringing to the conversation is real, but it's very complex. And the discussion becomes even more difficult. But if we want to reach a real change, we can't not consider all of this, of course.
Eu não acho que seja complicado assim.
What role does the angel investors play, and what percentage of angel investors are here in Brazil?
Can I answer that? As a board member of the Angel Capital Association. Unfortunately, we still
Da
have...
Associação de Investidores Anjos. Olha só, infelizmente, porque só temos poucos investidores agindo...
we still have a lot of regulation issues in that sense, especially in the labor space. And because of that, maybe a lot of potential angel investors, they do not invest directly into companies. That being said, I guess as opposed to what we see in the US, most of the businesses here are either self-funded or funded by friends and family. So in a sense, Brazilians are quite entrepreneurial people. But at the same time, we don't see the real engagement of the society or the government in terms of fostering and providing everything that kind of entrepreneurs need to take something out of the ideal and turn it into a real business. You see plenty of initiatives to very tiny businesses. We just recently approved our new regulation in Brazil, enabling people to establish single-person companies. Single partner, no employees, so you can understand, to have a small view about how we perceive entrepreneurs in Brazil. It's a lonely and very difficult journey, and most of the entrepreneurs here, they tend to do it by themselves because the ecosystem, the regulations, the money available doesn't help much. So we need more angel investors, we need more grants, we need a whole different environment for businesses, so we can help those small, tiny entrepreneurs, especially people who didn't have that kind of good access to education, so they can do something and build value. It's hard.
Just to say a little more about that, because it's my field. Humberto is part of my board also. Angel investment is growing a lot in Brazil. And this is a surprise for me at the beginning, because we had such a great crisis, we had so many problems. But I think that angels don't only, I'm sorry in English, angels don't only invest because of the returns. They need returns. They are not the richest people in the world. They need to return the money so they can continue to invest. But they always do that because they want something else. They want to give back to society. So today we have around, it's an estimate, it's not a very fixed number, around 7,000 angel investors in Brazil. And when we talk about impact investing for them, it's very, very interesting. Because 3 years ago, they don't know what's that. When we ask that, and Daniel knows because I invited him to talk to my angels, and they look at him like a very strange animal. But nowadays, for example, yesterday, I met with two of my most active angels, and they said to me, Maria Rita, we didn't know, but when we looked into our portfolio, half of it we can call it impact. Of course, we can discuss if it's really impact companies or not. Like Danielle was saying, they have they have the wish to do that or not. I don't know, but they are starting to see that. So I think if you help them a little better, we can use a lot of private money from angel investors to grow out this in Brazil.
So when you look at private equity investments in the U.S., about 21% of the money for private equity is actually coming going directly and asking for private equity returns as opposed to using an intermediary. And so, I would just hopefully encourage more angel investing. It's not for the faint of heart, but this is how small businesses who have good ideas that perhaps are scalable, but not to the point where they need private equity investment directly, could profit from an angel investor.
Good morning, everybody. I'm John. I am from Belo Horizonte. My name is João. I'm from Belo Horizonte. And I would like to thank you for your U.S. context. Thank you for sharing. And also thank you, Daniel, for what you spoke about the equity funds and what we have as an impact. I just have 2 comments and a question. I am from an NGO, but one of the first non-governmental organizations in a slum since 2015. So we have a lot going. And it was very interesting what you said about the board. I think we might have much to exchange and talk. One of the main issues is that how to get investment for small entrepreneurs. Why? We've been working. Actually, I like Luana's talk. We want to talk about survival, existing entrepreneurship for basic survival. But we're talking about people who are quite capable, quite creative, resourceful, can generate impact business locally, but have no access to investment. We did this one experience the one day. We did an acceleration program. Now it's the 6th edition. We invested 3,000 investment businesses, and it worked really well for 6 years now. And I would like to hear from Angels Brazil and from Vox. What kind of exchange do you see? Would you like to come see and give us feedback? Because we want to strengthen this ecosystem that we have in the outskirts and peripheral slum impoverished areas. So I would be glad to have your feedback. And my question, that's an invite, not my question. But here, first a fact, it's not a complaint. There's no black money in Brazil. There's always white money, and it's always going to be white money. And this logic is not going to be easy to get rid of. But when we talk about white money versus black money, we need to create means that even though money comes from private equity, white money, whoever class or ethnicity, they are at a higher stance than we are now. How can minorities be part of the decision-making process? How these investments, how can we collectively make decisions about money allocation? Maybe today you don't have money to invest, but we have the acknowledgement of a place to be heard, to learn about the difficulties and opportunities. I'd like to see what your take is. Social investments, what is your look? Because I don't want to fall into traps such as only social businesses, only thinking of this type of model. I'm not going to go into legal entity and issues in Brazil. But what is in favor for this type of equity fund? And ONGs in the third sector don't want to do social work. They want to they want to try and help people be profitable, and they don't have access to this kind of fund. So how do you see this changing and helping? And maybe, Benedita, if you have any, maybe an opinion from the U.S. would be interesting too. Sorry, what's called of acceleration? It's called Favela. It's slum in Portuguese. It's an acceleration for businesses that come from the slums. And I also would like to hear Venita's opinion on that. I think part of the answer is the need to evaluate and find different financial mechanisms, okay? So when you talk about 3,000 or 5,000 grants for small businesses, we're talking about microcredit lines, okay? Or microloans. So this, we're not talking about an actual private equity fund or something major. It is an operation that offers microcredit, microloans for micro entrepreneurs. When you go beyond that range, you get into something that becomes much harder to find investment, especially for those who are very important, have great impact, but they are not scalable, you see? So that means you have to find some other loan or credit line models. I agree there aren't enough out there. And what I see is today there may be a very relevant impact in the future, which is called crowdfunding. I love crowdfunding. I'm a big fan because you see what you do. You really distribute power. So sometimes you have a lot of money in the hands of one people, and then you can distribute that more equally. And we have crowdfunding platforms nowadays that works as donations, as grants, as acquisition, as private equity, as shareholding money. I heard that the central bank will help peer-to-peer lending. And that is something that in Brazil we find absolutely, since 2010 we've been looking at this, and that's absolutely essential. We nearly invested in 2010 in the US. They have lending clubs in the US. They have prosperity funds, etc. And the entrepreneur, because of the antitrust law and corruption laws, because of white-collar crime, because the central bank wasn't central bank compliant, you see. So, but they are looking to this is changing. You have to have one-on-one, face-to-face investments and equity and learn. So when you see this type of movement happening towards that, you see a trend. I see in time more models will be created that can be scalable even. And that's when you find other means and other funds. That's the first part of my answer. The second part of my answer, it's something that concerns me as well. We are in Vila Madalena, which is, I am white, I've got blue eyes. I am in a rich area. Vila Madalena is a very expensive neighborhood. At Vox team, we have people who live in these sleeps, but the decision-making for investment comes from investors who, you know who they are. So again, I'm going to bring the board, the committee for decisions. So all new investments, the entrepreneur goes through a judgment and evaluation. So saying, who is your target audience? Okay, mothers who, for example, look after their children's health. So it's a prepaid card to have discount on medical consultation and prescription medication, for example. So put together all mothers who look after their children's health, and that's how you're going to present this. It's not ideal. I wish I had more representative in our investment committee. I think that's one of the ways, by the way, obviously, because if you have to give voice to those you want to target. But I think it's a path that is under construction, okay? Work in progress. And yes, I want to learn more about your work, and let's exchange contact details.
Much after that. But what I will say is that in the United States, one of the things that is changing the face of investments is the internet. It's one of those big disruptors, if you will. And because most of the financial institutions are highly regulated, i.e. Banks, even Wall Street, there were certain standards that had to be put in place before you could even make a loan or make an investment. Now, as you mentioned, the crowdfunding, the GoFundMe accounts, that's just a whole new ball game. And the issue with that is that is the investor educated enough to understand what they're investing in, and can they really sustain the risk of loss? And it'll be interesting to see if some of those cases result in sufficient losses such that they get elevated to a regulated situation. So.
Final question? Do we have time for a final question?
Olá, meu nome é Ludovino Lopes, eu sou advogado, trabalho há alguns anos
I'm
já.
a lawyer. I work with entrepreneurship issues and social environmental impact entrepreneurship. That's my area of expertise as a lawyer. I am talking about the instability in compliance and regulatory environment. Now we are at a point that government lack reliability and institutions are under threat, and even media are not trusted anymore. So this trust crisis and individual resilience is coming to be. Is very much coming along in some institutions, and reliability, trustworthiness must be recovered, I would say. So there's a saying in law, we say, law climbs up the stairs, go up the stairs, and the society takes the lift, takes the elevator, means they get there much faster. So laws are always lagging behind. So we see most of human feud and work where we need to work and have more solid rules and standards. What we see is self-regulation. Do you know what I mean? The sector itself self-regulates, entities get together and self-regulate. They create conduct norms and codes and regulations, a group of principles that are then adopted as guidelines, they call them, for that particular sector. Now, my question is to Rivitina and to Daniel. I'd like to address the question to the two of you. First question is the U.S. experience, if you could share a bit. Is it self-regulation? What does it take? Or should come from a direct principle, should be imposed from the government so it can actually happen? Or would you say it's 50-50? There's like gray areas, non-regulated areas, that players do their own regulation? And my other question is for Daniel. Daniel, how would you feel? Would you feel comfortable with self-regulation? What is your take? What's your opinion? Do you think we can create principles that can be created to investment, that can bring rules somehow that could go beyond what we have today with traditional issues? Let me talk about self-regulation. I'm talking about law gaps and go beyond legislation and law. Is what compliance. We don't need compliance to what is already self-regulated, but innovate in the sense to bring a more safe environment between different parts so business can actually happen.
So in my country, the word regulation is a very political question. If you're a Democrat, you want more regulation. If you're a Republican, you want less. So I'm not sure how to answer that question.
Are you a Republican or a Democrat?
I don't want to say. But what I will say is that human beings have a tendency to have excesses, if you will. Some of those excesses get us into trouble. And so I think that there is a need for regulation. I think self-regulation, I don't know what that is. I don't know if I've experienced successful self-regulation. So I guess I would say that government has a part. Sometimes government overreaches to compensate for what happened last week, which will never happen again. But then you overregulate. So I think a balance needs to occur. I think legislators need to work with practitioners to develop rules that are realistic and practical and actually capable of being understood. And if more collaboration existed between the business community and the government, it would be a much better situation.
Quanto ao Brasil, eu acho que assim, a regulamentação.
As for Brazil, when we think of investment regulation or venture capital, it's all very structured. We have a lot of regulation here. These are very rigid and strict, and demand a lot of transparency indeed. What I see many people talking about impact investments, that we would need some sort of regulation, legislation, so that we give benefits to investments that pursue social impact outcome. You see, I am very cautious about this proposition because in practice, needs to demonstrate what legislation is actually pursuing. What's the agenda? It's all very new to create a legislation that will say this and this and the other deserve tax exemption. This one does not deserve tax exemption. In this case, we need to keep on going with free of any benefits from. We follow the same rules apply for everybody. And then if you can indeed prove that the impact is real, that makes a difference in practice, and what is the actual practical difference, then we can put that in paper. We can't, I would say, place regulation ahead of all of that. That would be undermining my own work. Oh, come. Because I'm pursuing tax exemption. I don't want to undermine my own work. But first, I would look into the practical aspects before we talk about extra regulation and legislation indeed. Well, I thank you, the three of you, Matsuda, Revita, Gabriel, Daniel, for this discussion. It's exciting, but indeed we need to go. We have to go. We go to our fourth and last panel of the day. That will discuss instruments to foster business opportunities, and we'll also have a similar dynamic. But first and foremost, I would like to invite Luciano Schweizer. He's an expert and leader at BEAD, and he will give a very quick PowerPoint presentation. Thank you very much, and let's move forward. You've got the floor, and you've got the pointer as well.
Muito boa tarde. Inicialmente.
First and foremost, I would like to thank for the invite. I think we're going through a very optimistic moment now. And I think this is a very suitable moment because we're trying to build several things. And the main learning here, the main takeaway of the recent times, I would say, is that the dynamics will come from the private sector, private society. So I am part of with this trade. I am very happy to see Brazil Angels here that working with entrepreneurship because I started entrepreneurship back in the 90s. And I work with the association from the private sector. And that was such a far-fetched dream. And we started with IDB, I remember back in the late 90s to try and put together the first angel investment network. And I remember back then we had partial success. It wasn't full-on success. And back in the 90s, I had the opportunity to get closer to the Black Entrepreneurial Center in Rio. And the challenge to work with this topic, to work with this audience, and to see this room filled with people, is indeed great satisfaction. So I think I have a very positive comment here. We have enough indicators now to at least monitor and see and follow. Not in everything, but in great advancements there. I have actually for you more questions. But first and foremost, I have to showcase my association and speak about the IDP. It's a unilateral entity. And the purpose is to finance feasible projects, also socio-economical development, including institutional development, fostering regional and commercial integration in Latin America and the Caribbean region. We were founded in 1959 with our president, Juscelino Kubitschek, because we are a credit capital corp. And it came from 1959 with this idea to solve stability problems and help with the fragility with international context with the Latin American economy. So basically, it came to help foot the bill, make ends meet in the region. Then it developed to infrastructure projects, social projects, and found the private sector support. And now integrating the credit co-op 48 countries, member countries, out of which 26 are borrowers, meaning they loan money, and 22 members are supporting, but not with borrowing capital, but they support the institution. Pardon me, they don't receive loans, not they don't borrow funds. Now, today, we call it the BID group. We call it IDB group. But in Portuguese, it's BID. Because we were the first institution working with public policies and government funding. So we've got colleagues here, my peers, all from this side of the counter with the Inter-Development Bank, IDB, but we also support other civil society and other private sector institutions so that we can have further discussion for public policies. In 1985, we created the Investment Inter-American Cooperation for mid-size and small-size companies. And last year, this cooperation got reinforcement capital-wise, and now we have all its needs, financially speaking, fostered by the private sector. And the third is the Multilateral Investment Fund, is our research and development lab inside our group. That's where we test public policies, mainly geared for social, economical sector. And with time, it's come through different adjustments. Now, I'd like to begin. If we're going to talk about innovation, I would like to invite you, ladies and gentlemen, to think, to not really be attached on the whole instrument fetish, so to speak. So here I'm going to copy this one instrument. This instrument is a solution for everything, is the panacea. No. Like we saw at the Cornelius presentation, the comprehensive range of possibilities that we have when we come to financial instruments. Especially in the last panel, we heard about this range Daniel mentioned that starts from donors, finance lines, and equity capital. In fact, what we have is a continuum of different alternatives available that can enable and instrument different practices. What matters is that you have to understand is that the financial intermediary that can happen via a bank can also happen via a private company, like a fintech, for example, can really shorten. Like crowdfunding can bring the two ends together in a much closer environment. But what it does is the link. If you have some sort of superavit, like an asset or capital, you're above the line. It can be not only capital, it can be with assets too. For example, reliability. You've got a group, a brand, that it has reliability. It can give you a voucher, can endorse your business. And that is beyond capital, you see. You're placing your reputation on the line, on the game. And also you have what we call the deficit players, meaning in red there. What does that mean? Who are they? First question, I think it was asked in the panel, what are the needs? What do they need? Thinking about feasibility, so important. How you turn these groups visible, bring them forward. Oh, well, the government should do this, but do they know? Does the government know? Who are they? Where are they? And what needs to be done? Sebrae here in Brazil would be our SBA counterpart in Brazil, kind of speak. So the organization is you see what your role is to help to give visibility, to bring this theme forward, to bring to agenda, to a regulation, to actions and legislation. That is important. I'm talking about instruments. Is to clearly understand the problem and come with a solution. And this financial intermediation will always involve one side, the agent that is above the line, that has less risk. Because the more risk you see, the less money or less whatever I want to implement on that one. On the other hand, I'm going to go through less risk because I have collateral too. You see, there's no much mystery there. I wouldn't say it's not a secret. You have the variables are always the same. So what matters is when you're talking about innovation when it comes to financial instruments in the financial sector, you got to think what you have to put on the table. And think about the context. It's all embedded in a context. Our friend there from Minas Gerais spoke about this when he spoke about slum, and Daniel recognized that. How can I learn about the context? What are the requirements of your entity, of your NGO? That is an important part, because if I do not have an understanding, my perceived risk will be higher. So my return my return, what I will want from you will be much higher too as a consequence. So understand the game. How can I improve this flow? It's so important. And I tell you what's more, with that, you can start creating solutions that will be a win-win. So financial solutions are solutions that align interests from both sides, for those who have the money, for those who need money, and the intermediary. If you don't have this alignment and this balance, Daniel said that, well, 7 years. Do I want to be 7 years with this person? What will I have behind me? A group of investors. The interests from all sides needs to be very well aligned and balanced so that you can have a win-win solution. This is an aspect. When you talk about instrument innovation, there's no magic solution. It is about grants, donation, finance, lending, capital, whatever you're talking about. Private equity is the most expensive resource, where that should be used in moderation, I would say. Only in the necessary conditions, truly, so you can truly leverage whatever you need to truly leverage. Study the context that needs to be financed first and foremost. Now I'm going to move on to the next point. Now I'm talking about the offer there of credits. Now think about the other side. Let's move on to the actual what the actual business is for the innovation business. So whoever works with innovation, we know about this canvas, right? So we have here. It is incredibly important. When you look at this, we see key resources, key partners. I need a capitalist, someone who will leverage there. Then I will need to have enough revenue and streams of earnings that will strengthen my key resources. This is basic formula, you see, but I can think this in different ways, alternative ways, in such a way that I transform. I can actually check and balance all the ways I have to generate resources. That's the key point. I'm small because I'm small. My privileged economic situation is available here. So how can I make this circle spin? Meaning, how can I transform everything that is cost into opportunity to leverage new revenues and new streams? This is exactly what it is. Because of the cost of how much private equity costs in Brazil, you'll be able to privilege self-resource generation. And that has to be permanently that, how you turn cost into revenue. Example that I read last week, when XP Investment, I can't remember the name. We were talking last week. What were they called again? XP Investment. We were talking about they were sold to Itaú. Why? When they started talking, they had money for nothing. So they started selling what? Training to help new investors in the bank. So what was it? Like marketing, sales, pre-sales cost turned into investments. You see this type of solution. So you can generate your own self-funding and manage to get money from this very first zero stage is essential. And obviously link to instruments that will help with the suitable points you need to and gaps you need to fill. So you have comprehensive alternative for finance that I think because of the points I've been making lately is how we can disrupt this initial barrier when the 3,000 thing cap, like he was telling. You have like a micro loan, financial line, but how can you, from your point of view, from your institutional point of view, there, your enterprise with your business, how can you break this, go through this? The first, evaluate your assets. What do I need? What am I missing? What am I lack? What assets do I need? What do you need capital for? Oh, I need capital to rent space, facilities. I remember I was helping, consulting, advising a musician, and his dream was to have a restaurant and a bar in the evening. He could play his guitar in the evening, serve food. Have you ever managed a restaurant? No. Have you ever worked in a restaurant? Do you know? Never. No. So you're a musician. You have no restaurant experience. You're gonna break. You're gonna go broke. You need a place to. You need to find a place to play. You need to find someone who has the facilities that the restaurant that has space for you to work in the evening, start playing, They don't have the evening attraction there, and you are adding something to his restaurant business. Well, usually downtown, they only work during lunch hours. See if there's one that they do happy hour, after hour drinks. Maybe you can add rentability there, profitability by playing in his restaurant or bar. So you see, identify what the assets, what do you have? Because instead of buying a solution, you're buying a pain. So what is the suitable source for every asset, and then adopt the guerrilla technique, financing technique. It's very current. This is old news. It's 25 years old now. You only have to adapt to fintech nowadays, and you have several possibilities to finance your business. Here we're talking about really bring money to your business. And suitable pitches. So the bank, for example, when it starts raining, he's not going to give you an umbrella. So you need to talk to the bank when it's sunny. Start talking before. Start talking to your investor, because when it begins, when you need the resource, you're there. You're ready. And you're ready for the enthusiasm. And obviously, negotiating better financial terms. So your negotiation is going to be more advantageous for you. So this is my first introduction. We'll have the opportunity to discuss further. But I tell you, the 20 minutes I've been given will not be enough.
So what can we offer you from IDB's perspective? We'll have 3 solutions to offer to you. I mean, we also have donations, which is not on the slide because we use only on specific cases. And when it comes to financial solutions, we work with both private and public sectors. We have structured financing. So IDB works differently from the BNDES, the Brazilian Development Bank, that has these finance lines where you go to the counter and you know exactly what is being offered, while we offer case-to-case solutions, very particular ones. So if businesses have certain types of problems, we have specific dimensions for the company so we can provide them with the funds. In IDB, when it comes to collaterals, we can provide companies with solutions tailoring their needs. Foaming does not have any collaterals, but IDB may provide businesses with collaterals. And when it comes to equity, both Foaming and the corporation itself can participate. Well, can have these equity funds, though they are limited. Now IDB, because of its statute, just can't participate in equity investment funds, even because we don't want to create any kind of conflict that usually arises when you are working in a union and you take part in the equity fund of any kind of corporates in your association. We can't be partner with the companies and partner in IDB. So because of this, we established that we can't take part of equity funds investments. With that, I'm available in case you have any questions. Thank you very much. Ricardo, you may, remain with us on stage. And I would also like to invite Mr. Fernando Riesche, who is the manager of the Department of Investment Funds in the Brazilian Development Bank. Please come on stage. And also, I would like to invite Mr. Marco Antonio Fujihara, who will mediate the debate. I want to tell you all that after this panel, we'll have a closing session, and after that, we'll have a brunch that will be served outdoors. So I invite you all to take part of this brunch, where you can continue with the conversations that we began in the room. Thank you, Marco. Well, due to the time, I'm pretty sure you're hungry, right? So if you start asking many questions, I'll have to stop the session. I'm just kidding. Well, the idea here is to debate innovative financial solutions. In case you do have any question, please raise your hand. You know, you can get the mic. And already, you have a question already? I didn't even get started. I mean, go ahead. As I was saying, the idea is to discuss innovative solutions. There are two banks that need to have innovative solutions, IDB and the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES. Both of them have a statutory support, and therefore, this is mandatory for them, right? They need to come up with innovative solutions. I just want to provoke you here, Luciano and Fernando. I'm sorry about it, but I think we have to move forward. When it comes to innovative financial solutions, if we want to have impact, these solutions have not been too aggressive. And as far as I can see, we are at a very early stage when it comes to investment metrics. That is something we have not been debating about. On the other hand, in Brazil, we have traditional regulations from several institutions, which are traditional regulations. So I have this provocative question to you both. What type of innovative solutions are there for us to think of impact? If impact is a trend, what innovative solutions are there for us to deal with this? Well, good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation. I just want to tell you how the bank has been working with investment funds. We started investing in the mid-1990s, and today our portfolio accounts for about 3 billion reals that are invested in over 40 funds. This portfolio is very diversified in terms of the managers. There are over 20 investment managers with us today, working with funds in different sectors, with venture capitals, private equity, and others. And about 150 companies are invested. We're investing on. So throughout all these years, the bank has been evolving. We've been selecting the different managers we're working with, and the goals have been changing as well. As a development bank, we have several different goals when it comes to the fund investments we make. One of them is to develop capital investments and to bridge the market gaps. So I think when it comes to financial innovations, that is something we target all the time in the bank, but also when it comes to funds. We want to incentivize entrepreneurship more and more, as well as innovation. Some of the funds that have been very innovating back then, and the most recent funds we've launched, in 2007, we launched the first seed capital nationwide from Semia Tech. This was a very successful initiative. This fund is now coming to its end by the end of next year. And we've invested in 36 companies in 7 states in Brazil. With this project, we managed to develop many managers regionally with their managers, and since then, there's been this entrepreneurial culture that's been created. And we managed then to launch the second investment fund back in 2012 and the third one last year. These managers are different. We always have this open call. It is a very transparent process with competition involved, and we managed to increase entrepreneurial culture in Brazil with many incubators, accelerators spread out in the country. This is from Korea Tech Institution. About 3 or 4 years ago, based on international experiences in Brazil, as I always say, we are at an early stage when it comes to investments. when it comes to funds that are provided to small businesses. That is what we call corporate venture, which is something that's been done a lot in Europe and in the US. So we partnered with Embraer in the aerospatial sector. And this posed great benefits for small, medium companies and also for big companies because this was an innovation project. For small companies, it was great because they could build this network that it didn't have access before. They could leverage their potential. And for big companies, it was also very good because they could go beyond the knowledge they already had when it comes to technology. Many of these technologies are actually disruptive, so there is this great interest on the bank's side to foster this type of initiative, to have multiplier of knowledges in several areas, in several sectors. We recently renovated our portfolio and invested in different types of funds with different types of managers. One of these examples is an open call that we made in different sectors, and we selected 4 or 6 managers in each of these calls. In the first call, these managers are already in our portfolio investing in businesses, and in the second call, one of the examples is Daniel from Vox, who was here early in the morning, and he mentioned the social impact that is getting more and more important to society and to us as institutions when it comes to serving customers. And the second fund that is also very important to us is called Prima Tech. It is one that will invest only on companies that are part of incubators or technological companies, or even companies that were created in up to 2 years. All these companies need to have a revenue of up to 16 million, but part of this income will be part of the funds. Well, this is part of my background. We can go deeper if you want later on. Thank you, Fernando. I will, give the question back to you. I wish you could dance polka to us on stage. Can you do that? And then you'll tell me, well, I don't know how to dance polka. This is not the correct environment, and you haven't had enough alcohol, right? You haven't drank enough. So, well, bottom line is we need to adapt our expectations, right? Things do not happen out of the blue. And there are several topics here that have to do with adaptation. How do we go to market and adapt it? And some of these topics will take a little longer, and we need to be more persistent. Just like angel investors will have to wait about a decade until they see their return on investment. So it's all about finding the correct partners in Brazil. Same thing happened with Project Inovar from FINEP. It was a long learning process that started back then in the 1990s with the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES, working with risk capitals. I think that idea kind of got lost in the way. Tobias is around, right? And I always mess around with him because we have to know where money is, where we can massively find this capital that can be used to invest. I mean, everyone now has a good score. I mean, we have many taxes in Brazil, urban taxes and automotive taxes. Now, just because I get this tax back in the beginning of the year, what if someone could offer me a little more to partner with companies? Wouldn't I be able to use this tax return to invest in small companies? Well, now let's say I gave my money to Daniel. He's working in his small business, and he thinks I'm going to give money to him, but I won't. The thing is, he'll have to gather this money and look for different companies, look for those who are gathering this information. With the work that is being carried out in Belo Horizonte, a different city in the Midwest of Brazil, the whole point is to develop the whole chain. If we compare this to the US scenario, what is the main focus of them? Well, they talked about small and medium enterprises, right? In Brazil, we only work with micro companies, smaller than the small companies. Now, who are working with medium-sized companies? These companies need to be tailored, need to have specific services provided to them. So have to make sure that all players may interact in the proper time, in the proper moment in time. So I think, well, and as far as I understood from the previous panels, we can't create too much expectation. I mean, we have to drive the process, but not come up with expectations and think it's going to be an easy process. It won't, because there is a whole chain that needs to go about. We have to convince the bank, you have to convince the Supreme Court, for instance, the bank has to convince them that they made the correct choices when investing in certain companies. And this takes time. All of these things take time. So we have to align our expectations so that they are real. I think we have to consider the ecosystem, the pipeline, but we have to be as creative and as innovative as entrepreneurs. I've seen the development of several financial tools, and one of them is called First Loss Catalytic Fund, which is a combination of multilaterals or even different banks with private investors that may put together risk investments, operation investments, and allocate part of their capital in social projects. And for those who don't want to invest on social projects, they can have their profits coming from other types of investment. Now, when it comes to different funds that allocate capital long-term, just like Endowment Fund, that can be used to impact investments as well. Now, bottom line here, and the provocation I have for you both on stage, is that in Brazil, these investment funds, the traditional private equity funds that we have, and we have FDIC, which is not exactly a fund. It is all about credit rights throughout time. So what I mean is that we have to put all these different factors on the table. First loss is something we have debated a lot along with Luana and other folks from the project on the global impact investment network that is being carried out in Washington. So I'd like to understand if we really have the ability to innovate, to create this pipeline innovation in incubators and accelerators, of course, but also in the process itself. This is what I'd like to hear from you, if you agree with me or not. We are always open to new ideas and proposals, and we are sort of flexible when it comes to creating new funds. Now, what comes before launching this open call for an investment in the bank? What we have to do is to go and study the theme, talk to potential candidates, managers, and other investors. Because our second goal is to leverage resources. For every real that is invested by the Brazilian Development Bank, we aim at 4.5 reais of return. So this is a great leverage. And we have to try and understand how to capture these resources, if we have enough demand for it, and what companies are to be invested on. There is an ongoing open call that will close June the 9th that has to do with innovation, specifically in the Brazilian market. And we lack innovation here. This is the segment that is called venture debt, that is very common in the US. What we want to do here is to help companies with that. As we saw in the presentation from Mr. Marcelo, we need capital for small and medium-sized companies, and this is too expensive. So with this project, we'll be able to lend to these companies at not such a high cost with an attractive ROI for investors, but that is below what has been mentioned here, and we'll be able to gain with this value of the company. It could be converted into shares in the future. This open call is now open up until June the 9th for companies that have a revenue of up to 9 million reais. So the bank is able to provide with up to 50% of this fund, and the other 50% will be done by the investors. This is the type of initiative that we have for this project and to other ones, to have a higher capital investment in the beginning, and as we may capture more investors, we may, spread the investment along with them. For those funds where we can work with convertible debentures, where in those funds, we can start at an earlier stage, and for some companies, this will solve their initial problems. Now, from the investor's perspective, I think it may help him or her to have this getting to know period with the company before they get married, if you know what I mean. They can get to know each other and then make the decision. That allows this decision-making process to be done a little later when the company feels that there is a real potential and an interest from the investor's perspective to invest in this or that company. So from this point of view, this may actually be a solution that will respond and meet the demands from an important sector of society. Will respond to the needs of this chain of companies that look for investment capital. I would like to talk to a professor who gave the talk early in the morning. Of course, we know that impact investments need to be measured differently. We need to find different metrics. What metrics would this be? If we consider the research from the professor, we would have to change it all. And if changing it all will solve the problems, we don't know. So as far as we can see, we don't have traditional investment funds or committees or boards. I mean, if we talk about an investment board in the US, it doesn't work, right? This is something you have in Brazil only. If this board does not know about investing, why are they there first place? That's the question, right? So why do we have these boards in Brazil? They started back in the 80s because there was a lot of controversial issues, and then people tried to regulate these investments and then built this board of investments, as they call it. Anyway, that's a different story. The thing is, what type of metrics do we need for investor managers? What types of metrics do we need to show people that this or that project will or will not work? And what are lessons learned? This is part of the innovation process. If we keep on using the same metrics, we're going to continue doing things over and over again, the same thing, right? For the managers that we've selected, they need to provide us with several indicators. This is mandatory. Many of them are connected to innovation, some of them to employment rates, to external factors, to society. So metrics is always something we worry about. In the bank's website, you can see this summary where you see our consolidated portfolio, the main figures in several sectors, in several investments that were done, and they are separated in categories and sectors. Now, as we build this long-term relationship with companies, and it takes time for these companies to grow, metrics have to be thought of long-term as well. So this debate is something we're talking about, and it is important indeed because we need, and we do have a department that assesses metrics and indicators. In my department, we work along with them so as to define what indicators will be assessed long-term so that we may understand what is the ROI, which is very important, but also to understand what is the social impact, effectiveness, and others. I failed to mention Marcelo Paixão's work because, we've been working together for a long time. So I took it for granted. But there is one issue which is a financial issue and a constitutional issue where we have to understand how we solve this issue on bringing the financial sector closer to entrepreneurs. This is crucial to understand. But I think Brazilian society is currently focusing on that, on how we can build more appropriate models to foster the financial system, but also to help the financial system to understand the needs of society. On the other hand, metrics are important because they will tell you what you're going to measure. And also, this is going to be the argument that you will have to sell the company or to sell your idea to investors. So segmenting is important so that investors may understand where and what they're interested in at an early stage. And in the US, I think you already have this scenario where investors, they have the proper background to say that this or that investment is good, socially and culturally speaking. This investment is good and it brings or it does not bring social inclusion. Now in Brazil, we'll have to start measuring this topic, these different metrics, so that later on we may identify who the investors are or who are the investors that will be interested in participating in this type of help for companies. Any question from the audience? Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marco Antonio. First and foremost, I would like to remind you all that Professor Helio Santos, Professor Helio, you're guilty along with Miria Leitão. Because of you, I am now taking the economy graduate course. And I'm mentioning you because you came up with this discussion more than 20 years ago with your book, right? The book you wrote 17 years ago. Right, so back then you already made this debate along with the Black movement debates. So I think it's important to acknowledge that. Because maybe if we could hear more about you, maybe we would know even more. And I also want to remind you that the first investment bank that was created, just so you understand this connection between Brazil and the US, dates back to the 1800s. And in Brazil, we call them unions. So I'm just telling you this to let you know that we are kind of delayed in Brazil, right? So from your experience, the panelists, I came up with a survey, and there was a text that was published in 2016, 2017. That was not a research, it was just a sample that was taken out of 200 entrepreneurs, roughly. And we could say that 80% of these entrepreneurs were women that worked in services. So just to give you a background, these were hairdressers and small stores. Now, from your perspective, you are the lenders. How do you see cooperativism in this sense? Because this could be one of the ways we could change the entrepreneurial mindset from society, because it gets real hard to talk about small entrepreneurs. How can we move them and make them become medium companies? In this research that we made, we understood that small entrepreneurs live in impoverished areas, in urban centers, and of course they are these impoverished people. The question is, how can we move them to the second level of this entrepreneurial activity? Early in the morning, it has been said that much of this work that these entrepreneurs have been carried out won't exist, won't be there in about 10 years. So from your experience, how could we use this cooperativism as maybe one of the stages to leverage these entrepreneurs, maybe to grow their own business or to come up with different businesses in the future? Thank you for the question. You raised a very important point. It is something to be celebrated, actually. The credit cooperatives and the collaterals cooperatives have advanced a lot. Now we solved one problem and we failed to solve another one, right? I don't think it will be cooperativism itself. So let me give you an example from Japan. Entrepreneurial associations in Japan have partnerships with banks, and they register their customers. And that is something that is costly for banks, and it is done for free in the institutions. So these partnerships make the process become much faster. And there are some collaterals mechanism, because the bank always wonders if this institution will pay them. But as a group, you know the businesses will pay the bank back. So it's all about connecting the financial system with businesses so that, and I think professor's talk was very important because it's all about how we can bring the banks closer to businesses so that they understand how important this link is, and also how can we help banks lend money to these small businesses. That's why your question is so important, because I think tools are already out there. The whole thing is just how can we change all this and make it a specific work for different groups that are represented by you. Based on the previous talks, I think we could, and based on Cornelius's talk, we can also say that there is this big decrease on problems when we have companies organized in cooperatives. Now the thing is, how can we deal with them? Where I work currently, we do support companies. We don't give support to associations. Other parts of the bank have credit lines for associations. Now, just to give you an example, on one of the investments that we've done is in the state of Acre, in the north part of the country, very far from São Paulo. And we are supporting a venture capital fund in there that invests in the Amazon area only. These are sustainable entrepreneurships. And one of the companies from Acre is associated to one of the companies that we work with. So this may be one of the solutions we may find. They may be partners. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a comment and a question. My comment is, this debate did not start last year. It didn't start 5 years ago. It didn't start 10 years ago. I think this debate started back in 1985 when the letter S was added to BNDES, which is the Brazilian National Bank. There is a whole deal of engineers and investors and funds. But, you know, it's business as usual. You lend money to the same companies, to the same individuals, to the same group, so they may do the same thing. Now, this is the question. Here comes the question. Why is it so hard for us to assume risks and to innovate and go beyond what is obvious? Because we could only copy what they do in the US or what they do in England and have these beautiful tools. Now, why is the Brazilian Development Bank does not invest on community development, which has a lot to do with what is done in the US? Well, time is money, right? We are now debating something that is not usual for the Brazilian business. We're talking about inequality and prejudice. People are resistant to that. Yesterday, we were in an activity with Ethos Institute, and I believe about 20 companies signed this commitment with racial inequality. It is crazy because we speak different languages and we don't understand each other. I do respect the Brazilian Development Bank, which is the national champion, as the advertisement said, right? We as black people, we don't want to talk to a Brazilian champion. I mean, my question for you is, I want you to speak freely, okay? Sincerely speaking. Be honest with me, okay? How willing are you and how open are you to talk about discrimination and racial prejudice and investments that are done on companies that are managed by black people. Can you give me an overview on this? Do you have any inside information? It kind of piggybacks on my colleague's question back then, right? Does anyone have any other hard question for us, or is it enough? I think it's enough, right? Can we order a pizza? Good afternoon. My name is Elida, and I'm the founder of Afro-Box. It is a pleasure to be here today. My question actually piggybacks on my two colleagues here. Professor Marcelo was actually my professor not a long time ago. He inspired my journey a lot in the academia and as an entrepreneur. Now, my question is regarding what goes about in startup companies in Brazil. I have a startup company along with two other friends. We are a women black company. We have this tech approach to solutions, but it was very hard for us to start our business because back then we were three black women. Three black women talking to many white men that hold their power in their hands. Now my question is, as I said, to complement the two previous questions, how are you thinking of all this? Because one of the things we heard for a long time, as we were validating the idea of our business, as we were introducing the company to people, the question was, why was it important for us to have a business such as the one that we were tackling, which was the issue of beauty in the black women universe. Women with black women with afro hair. They asked us why this was important. Why should they invest on such a project? So it's all about how you deal with this different perspective, because if we don't speak out, if we don't speak our minds on sexism, on racism, we just can't destroy some of the prejudiced looks. Even when people are thinking if they are going to invest in our business or not. How do you go about that? We have one more hard question, I think. Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Rufino. I'm a cultural manager and I work with communications. I would like to comment on institutional identity. Because if we think of semiotics, we can identify that you are not open to us as we are open to you. Many people are shy and don't take part in the conversation. They don't look for information. Our market is very well shaped. Many small entrepreneurs are invisible and they're trying to start a movement, but we see that markets do the same thing over and over again. So when I go to Afro entrepreneurships and I want to sell my clothes, many people do the same. And I see people have these great ideas, but unfortunately they do not have the education they need. And due to these social rules, they don't introduce their amazing ideas because those who have the money do not consider new ideas. So it's all about monopoly and intellectual rights, among other issues I would like you to comment on. Good afternoon. My name is Daniela. I'm from Jacareí, a city in the countryside of São Paulo. I can't speak so well, but when my friend called me to be part of this Congress, something that stood out for me, and I will be honest with you, was not because this was an Afro Congress, because I think there's room for everyone, for good ideas, for good investments. But unfortunately, people who suffer the most are black people. And that is because black people are usually more impoverished. There is a company that is called Soudier Doces. It is a company that sells cakes. This company stood out for me because the lady who owns the company used to produce cakes, to make cakes, to sell. And because she got sick, she started to increase the number of cakes she made. And today she owns 270 stores that sell cake throughout Brazil. And she never had any kind of help from any bank. Now, I'm not talking about her skin color. I'm talking about her social class. And to talk to these people, you have to adapt language. Sometimes we don't even understand what the bank is talking about. So I believe banks need to be transparent, have a simple language, and tell us, well, you have to go up until here, you have this credit line available. But that is something that does not reach us. And it's not only about our skin color. We don't even have an opportunity to reach you. When we do, you tell us, I'm sorry, you can't get there. Because we, who are poor, we are hairdressers, we make cakes. And that is not important for banks. Banks want to have companies that are as big as they are. If you're not, they don't even talk to you. So I think this panel is very interesting. But it seems to me that I'm going to leave this room and I will take nothing from here. I will take information, of course. It will be a great takeaway. But if I don't go there and do things, if I don't work 15 hours a day, I won't change my current situation. That was it. I was going to wait to ask my question, but Jennifer's question has a lot to do with mine. My name is Ulysses, and I've been here since the beginning of the Congress. You guys on stage talked about 54% of Brazilian people, which is the majority of minorities in the country. I'd like to learn from you how that impacts our artistic and cultural environment, because 75% of micro-entrepreneurs in Brazil are Afro-descendants. But we don't produce cultural things. It is very hard for us to build a theater play or high-quality music or write a book or things that are interesting for society. And why is that? Because it just doesn't sell. In Brazil, we don't think of art as something that goes beyond entertainment. So it's very hard for us not to focus on things that make people think of things and elaborate on it. We want to think of art culturally, not only as something that may allow us to become rich, to become a boss. That's not what I'm talking about. We want to focus on culture because of the ideas we have.
Okay, great. Let's answer one more and then we'll wrap. Selma, you had to be last but not least. Morning, I'm Selma. I'm from Baobá. You speak about fostering instruments, and that's what the panel topic is. My question is, we go around, we always hear the same things. Difficulties with access, banking barriers, discussions about banks are always about this. And we're always talking about small businesses. So I'd like to understand what the ways are. What are the proposals by banks? What are they putting on the table so we can create tools very much mirrored on Eugene's presentation. Here we have a bank, here we have a civil society entity. They can intermediate, they can talk both ways in a simple manner and truly make entrepreneurs to have access and at the same time communicate with organizations that detain the capital so that distribution truly happens, like he exposed. So we as a fund, that we want to be this guy, that guy that Eugene spoke about. But at the same time, we have the challenge of how to put it together because the barrier is there, the limiting barrier. So here in practice, what the mechanisms are for pathways like this. Okay, let's answer and then we wrap. I really liked Professor's question. It's going to be a secret between us, mind you. So I recommend that we can do an overview of these questions and not an overview, sorry. Everybody can answer. Let's see if I remember everybody's questions. There's been so many. I thought it was just going to be the one or two, so I apologize in advance. I don't know if I remember all questions. Going back to discrimination, it was said in the beginning, the way you do your pitch, how you do your presentation, how you introduce things influencing the decision. I just want to explain what the selection process is like for the Createch Fund. And other funds I know do the same. There is a portal, or an online portal that you submit your proposal there. So the first one is an application in writing and your business plan that you put forward there. There is no discrimination, race, or anything because you don't see anyone. It's just a written application. When it comes to meeting people in person, is the second phase. So you need to have a feasible, fittable thesis and business plan, an application. So what's been happening? Createch invested in 36 companies, but they analyzed 30,000 proposals. So several are good, but they do not fit. They do not match our fund. So you see, so that was the social area, what we've been doing, always landing to the same people, that kind of question. I've worked in the social, yeah. Now, I've worked in the social, yeah. Eu ouvi a sua resposta e agora eu tenho outra pergunta para você. Porque
from them, and in what I heard in your answer is an opportunity for you to develop a business client development program. You can develop these entrepreneurs to come to you and teach them how to dance and teach them how to do that business plan and develop them where they become your client and it's beneficial to you, no? So I would say that the discrimination that they are expressing here is a golden opportunity for us. It is a golden opportunity for the commercial and financial institutions of Brazil, because they are saying we are thirsty to learn, to have access, to be invited to the dance, but we don't want to be just talked to and invited to the dance, as the reporter says. We want to be invited to dance. But if they're going to be invited to dance, you have to teach them how to dance. So it's in the best interest of the bank and the financial industry to develop a program for client development, no?
Sim, exatamente. Essa é uma das questões que estão em discussão exatamente no banco, para a gente adequar a nossa forma de trabalho, porque isso já foi uma lacuna que a gente identificou, e aí falando também de outra área, porque eu estou há mais de 15 anos no banco, já trabalhei em 8 áreas diferentes.
15 areas, and I've been in 8 different departments. 15 years, 8 departments, and one of them was environment, okay? BNDES is responsible for the Amazonia Fund, the forest. Different from my current department, to help deforestation in the Amazon region with resources from Germany and Norway. So it feels like it's disconnected from what you said, but indigenous communities need to finance lines from the bank, and they have to write a business plan, and they're Indians. They live in a tribe. We got it all wrong. Not wrong, so to speak, but not suitable. Was it a grant, reimbursable, not so there are is there return? So the bank team gives consultancy, advice to these indigenous communities to put together a suitable business plan to be approved by the bank governance. So you see, just for example, I'm giving you, this is not replicated in other areas of the banks, however. So going back to my first question of what I was saying before, what we see in the media is that we always support the same companies. This is not the topic, but the bank in the past 2 years recurrently has been doing 1 million transactions per year, operations per year. 1 million operations, average companies supported 200,000. So, naturally, the check is smaller. We have We call the BNDES card for small, medium-sized companies. We also have microcredit lines, but BNDES Bank is a credit a credit card that you have pre-approved loans and fixed rates. We've been able to finance nearly all municipalities in Brazil with this card alone. So today, investments in micro, small, mid-sized companies is 35% of all of our resources are allocated to that. So the fantastic suggestion by you, we can replicate like the indigenous suggestion to other areas of the bank. It's not as easy. That easy. Well, you said, let's imitate the US. Let's look at America. We would love to be able to have the same models they have in the US and from other countries too. I mean, look, in our department, we try to replicate international successful experiences, but when we adapt the Brazilian model, those who work with business in the finance world and regulation in Brazil and knows about our legislation, unfortunately, there are so many restrictions when it comes to the feasibility, applicable, practical side of things. So we try to adopt the best world practices, but the competitiveness environment in Brazil has to be suitable to our country. I want to go back to that other question. We always been trying to do this work, to be the liaison, the link of different segments, we call them. But again, look, it's not as trivial, not as simple in Brazil, because in Brazil, we always end up more involved with more government entities and difficulties, more than we predicted in the beginning. But I think it's an amazing solution, mind you, to have a model similar to what was presented by Eugene. It was a great example there. And that's learning for us. That's a good experience. Mind you, we can talk later more about this. Luciano? Look, I think the moment is now. The momentum is here. What's behind is indeed behind and is not suitable, but I think the moment is to change is now. The banks have an interest, yes. BNDES, BID has an interest. We are looking for means to match our work to this audience and find solutions that are suitable to the needs, to specific needs. Now, going back to that last question. There is no magic solution. We need to segment things and find the right partners, suitable partners. Banks will sort part of it. Commercial banks too. Development banks will sort other problems. Sebrae will sort other problems. It's a whole puzzle, you see. There are other agencies from a public administration that will come together to, you see, there's not one-stop solution, like one-stop shop solution that will sort everything. No, this will not happen. And if I told you otherwise, I would be fooling you. I would be deceiving you. This is full sincerity moments here, an honesty moment. The demands means that you have to help institutions to organize and find the right links. Like Marcelo said, we need to understand what's happening, how. What is our part in this dance? What is the best way for our institution to engage? How we can help with other players, public players too. Because because we're a bank, we can't go over our government, for example. So together with the Brazilian government, we can do something, you see? So these type of movements are happening. And they need to come and transform themselves into demands. But I think this is the right moment. Maybe the past 5 years, I would tell you, it's moved quite quickly, I would say. So I would say if we can manage to identify where to start, where the thread to see, where to pull, that first tip there that it starts to unravel everything, we'll be able to accelerate the whole process. But mind you, there's one magic solution that will suit everybody that we're going to just pull out of a magic hat. No, it's going to take a few years, okay? Are you sure? Last question. Are you sure?
First of all, I just want to commend the panelists for having the bravery to confront many of these issues that you are confronted with. And I will say, I'll make a statement first and I'll ask a question. You know, the arc of history is a long one, and it takes time for change. In the United States, African Americans and minorities have been fighting to get private equity dollars for 40 years. and we are still not where we want to go. But my question is, what kind of commitment are you making to recruit talent from these communities who can represent you best once they are trained to do the job of putting money out to communities? Can you comment on that?
1 minute for cada
I'm sorry, which kind of communities?
Você está comprometido em comprometer? Please wait for...
Because if it's, no offense, all white men making the decision, there's going to be this disconnect of trust on one part and the ability to be sensible, culturally sensitive to the environment or the entity. So are you committed to developing and giving and rising in your employment in your organization Afro-Brazilians to represent this community and to make that connection?
A gente está fazendo isso.
We have been permanently provoking and searching and doing more. It is a process to understand and start provoking so we can give suitable answers. I think it's in everybody's interest that we can put in practice every day. Yes, my answer is yes. We're available. Come with proposal, with new stuff. Like in my current department with new funds, whatever. Every initiative that is being raised here by the audience, if I didn't answer something, I'm available. I can forward your proposal to the right department at the bank. Like I said, we have several areas, and gender, race, and discrimination combat issues is a priority in the bank. Yeah. When you go to war, don't look the eyes or the size of the soldier. Just see how much is he willing to fight your struggle, to fight your battle. That's what you have to look at. This is a commitment. We are willing. We are open to change. So willpower, good faith, we are in. Thank you very much, everyone. Leno, I think we're pressed for time. I know. Look, I won't do the final remarks, no. But I thank you, Fernando, Marco, and Luciano. We will now get to the end of this panel structure. Now we have the final wrapping session. Now on to the stage. I would like to invite again Humberto Matsuda, performer ABV Cap, Angel Brazil partner. And also would like to invite Hugo Flores de Moura from BID Brazil. Let's start with Humberto. You're going to do your final remarks. Then I'm going to pass the floor to Hugo. Then I'll be back to thank you all and wrap. Thank you. Also, okay, Marcelo Paixão, please sit on the third chair. And also your for the final remarks. On behalf of BVCAP, I would like to first and foremost thank you all for your presence. It was undoubtedly quite an experience for us to reflect, to understand this reality. I confess, I admit, personally, I didn't have this deeper understanding. So I thank you from my heart for the opportunity to see things from a different point of view and understand things better. And I also want the public give my commitment of me and our entities to help. Our commitment to help with all the institutions and BNDES, Anjos Brasil, Endeavor, BIDS, to try and figure the best ways to address everything. And this reflection, undoubtedly, it's not going to be lost. It's not going to be restricted in the one morning discussion. undoubtedly we need to keep this going. So please, my final comments is let's stay connected and keep the thought and the energy going so we can be proactive and solve things. What's fundamental is to not get lost in time, this conversation, or action-free, do you understand? So any idea, collaboration proposals, come approach us to bid, to Angels, to Endeavor, BNDES, come talk to us for everybody. Because we will find the real development venues. So in wrapping, thank you again for the opportunity. On behalf of BVCAP, also thank BID for the invite. Anjos Brazil, Key Associados, Endeavor, who else am I forgetting? Am I forgetting someone? I want to thank everybody. Sorry, I don't want to forget anyone. Sebrae, INSPER, and Adolfo Power Institute. Thank you. Marcelo, please speak with passion. Don't forget that you don't need to ask, darling. Okay, thank you very much. Well, thank you, BID, IDB, BID. Because I'm working on this. They originated by IDB, by BID. So I could never hide this information. This is a institution in strategy. And since I've had my first dialogues, I've always wanted to talk about this, the strategic character for the whole Latin America gender diversity. So we work with, as an institution, with variable key strategies. And here's my invite. Other institutions, if you have other strategic DNA, come with a BID strategy and name Banco do Brasil, Caixa Econômica Federal. They have the need to answer to what is being put forth and positively, mainly being proactive, thinking about what the civil society presents. What we expect is what behind is behind. We won't be able to fix. So what are we talking about? Next year, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, and we won't be able to get to 2050 inheriting 1950. So this is strategic demand of a strategic thought of the Brazilian society as a whole. And if the political system is going through such a struggle, so should civil society be able to push forward with your agenda. We are operating in a scenario that I feel of a generation project. The main issue that Brazil is now going through, that is not just the whole time really, is social inequality in all its reasons and means, gender, race, etc., economic reasons. So today and yesterday were incredibly important in this terrain because it's a landmark of a trajectory, of a journey, because we're talking about equity funds, we're talking about microcredit policies. It's the bar has raised. So I congratulate you, and I'm very happy to be asked to come here to talk about the study. I hope you read the study and make comments, because I believe this study has much to be talked about, criticized. No study is perfect. I want to highlight, like my friend who did economic course. I don't know if you need to take an economic course or major, but it's important to work with these issues that indeed have a technical dimension that cannot be taken for granted, especially for economic decision process. Sometimes they seem strange or far-fetched, but they are very much on variable-based that can't be ignored. So you see, if you're to change the agenda's bar, if you're to raise the agenda's bar, we need to change and raise the qualification of our group, of our people, like activists say, our people. Our group need to keep up with the change and raise the bar. It was such a pleasant morning, historical morning, I would say, and I'm incredibly proud to contribute with the reflections and to help the work. Thank you so much, Marcelo. Here you go. Oh, gracias, thank you. The challenges. We've been working as a group for 60 years. And there's so many changes So it doesn't feel like enough time. The challenges are greater or bigger. We all players who are key. We have our symbol, we have our role, our part, and our challenge, but it's important that we have space. Space to reflect, space to drive these changes forward. Now, we, as a bank, we have this concern and work, really. When we were asked, what is your bank doing as a development bank? This is the type of opportunity, indeed, precisely this, as a bank too, to speak to all sectors and come together with solutions. I thank Itaú for hosting, for welcoming us in this venue, and everybody who's supported the session. Also would like to thank the partnership that we've been working in this theme and other themes like Endeavor, Brazil Angels. Also all the speakers. I want to thank all the speakers. All the speakers did so great, such a wonderful exchange. All the audience engaged and interested, and the comments and ideas that we're taking home as a bank. Verenina, Cornelius, Marcelo, everybody he's living abroad. We had so many different experiences from so different places. It's so important, that is. And finally, this type of thing does not just happen. We make people make things happen. So Luana, I want to thank you for your help because we know of the work you've put on this. Very grateful I am indeed. Let's keep on the fight. The struggle keeps on. Let's keep on fighting. Thank you so much. We've come to an end on behalf of the Inter-American Development Bank and the Capital Program for Afro-Brazilian Entrepreneurs. We want to thank you all for partnership with the U.S. Consulate in São Paulo, Unibanco Itaú support. We're also thankful to all professionals working in this event, to the speakers, to the mediators who have accepted our invitation to be here with us today, and to all of you who have helped us and who have attended online and in person. And congratulations to the 30 Afro entrepreneurs selected for the Inova Capital first open bid. Now I'd like to invite you all to food and drinks being served at the hall. Please stay tuned with Inova Capital, our website, www.novacapital.net.br. Please stay tuned. We're also on social networks, so we can meet again. Me, Leno Silva, I say goodbye. Axé Saravai, the greetings from our African religions. Goodbye.